If there's one thing I dislike more than a cult leader, sadistic serial killer, it might be a wannabe cult leader, but also sadistic serial killer who later backtracks and says, "Oh no, I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was a seductive, beautiful woman who made me do it." Really, dude? Today, we are going to unpack Chad Daybell's lawyer's defense of his client and really see if we have the whole picture here. And I'm going to share some of my thoughts about this. Now, don't get me wrong. Lori is just as culpable as Chad Daybell. But the fact that anyone is trying to paint Lori as the only one who was doing all these terrible things at this point, with how much we know about Chad and his past and his prophetic wisdom that he wanted to share with the world, I think it's pretty safe to say that this defense is laughable. So let's get a little snarky today. I'm feeling a little spicy. I've got my hair up. So take a nice deep breath and let the fresh air in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're brand new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. So if you're into that sort of thing too, please consider subscribing to the channel. I would love to have you. And thank you so much for being here today. I hope you are having a great start to your week. I don't know why I'm feeling so salty today and sassy. It honestly could be the halter top. I don't know. I said in my intro, I'm getting really into claw clips. They're like my new thing. Maybe it's giving me a little more confidence. I am not sure what's going on. It could be that I tried to wax my own eyebrows this weekend and I literally burned my skin. So I'm just trying to overcompensate. I don't know, you guys. Word of advice, do not DIY your own facial wax. It will not work out for you. Anyways, this is not a funny video by any means. It is actually a very, very serious topic. And I wanted to dive into this, although I know a lot of true crime channels are talking about this, because we've seen in previous trials, especially when they involve a cult leader or a wannabe cult leader, we have seen prosecutors really create a great picture of the coercive aspect of the situation. And thanks to that picture that's been so beautifully painted, people have been able to be convicted as cult leaders, and the cult's been able to get completely destroyed or have a few people still supporting on the sidelines while their cult leader rots in prison. And obviously, that's incredibly sad to see. But what's really fascinating to me about this particular case is we've all seen how delusional Lori is. We understand her and Chad's past. There's a lot of evidence that points to Chad thinking that he is a prophet, which is actually against his religion, his Mormon religion, to claim that he can have a direct line of communication with God as if God is choosing him as a prophet. In the Mormon religion, only one person is allowed to speak for God, and that is the president of the Mormon Church. If you want a little bit more of a background on Chad himself, I did just post a video last week doing like a mini deep dive on him and his past and how he met Lori and some of his troubling beliefs and the doomsday aspect of this case that's so fascinating for people. So check that out if you're interested. When I was listening to the opening statements on this case, I had a lot of thoughts. And on one hand, I really appreciate how the state's attorney is being very creative and kind of painting this picture and sharing all of the facts. And they bring up Chad's religion, but they don't really go into the fact that, he believed he was a prophet. He believed he could assign human beings on being dark or light entities. He didn't touch too much on that, which I thought was fascinating. But I suppose if he did introduce that point of view or that argument, it would give Chad's attorney the opportunity to kind of turn things around and say, no, Lori's the cult leader. Lori's the one that was manipulating me. And he's already kind of doing that. Like, that's his only argument. And I part of me, just because that aspect of the case is so fascinating to me, so I could be biased there, but I really do wish that the state had made a better argument for the religious, coercive, culty aspect of this case, but it might make it more complicated if they did introduce that, because this wasn't an established cult like we've seen with Nature Boy and Carbon Nation or Keith Raniere in the Nexium case. So I can understand why he didn't want to introduce that as an argument and really stick to the tragedy at hand, because this is also an incredibly tragic situation and we really need to be focusing on the victims. Before I jump into Chad Daybell's lawyer, John Pryor's opening statement, I want to remind everybody about a few facts about this lawyer and also share some new information that I recently learned having listened to the Seriously podcast, which, once again, I'm a big supporter of Annie Elise, so go check out her podcast. She also does an update every week on this trial, so let me know if that's something you're interested in me doing. I know a couple of you said you'd like that, so I'd be happy to do that as well, because I am definitely following this very closely. Now, a couple months ago, John Pryor actually asked the court if he could be dismissed from this case. He didn't want to do it. Apparently, the funds had ran out. Chad doesn't have any more money to pay him, so he would basically be doing this pro bono. He wouldn't be getting any money for it. And he mentioned in this motion that he had been trying to find an additional attorney to assist him, and he couldn't find anyone who was qualified to deal with a death row sentence. And I don't know. I mean, I totally understand you wanting to get paid for your work. That's a very, very valid concern. However, I also can't help but wonder if he started recognizing that this was going to be a very unwinnable case. There was really only one tactic that he can use, and that is to just blame Lori. Do everything he can to make it look like Chad was not culpable. Chad was just doing what he was told. Chad was under Lori's spell, and that's exactly what he's trying to do. And I watched another YouTube channel. I think it's Your Lawyer Friend. I'll leave all of these resources in that pinned comment down below so you can go check them out if you're interested. But he was saying that that's like the best argument that he can do. It's the smartest move on his part if he wants to win this case. But at the same time, I'm like, it just feels unwinnable to me. But I've also been following this for years now. So I think since I know so much about the case so far, I mean, we could obviously learn new information at any second throughout the next 8 to 10 weeks. But from what I know so far, the evidence is just like completely stacking up against Chad. I mean, the children were found in his backyard. Or as John Pryor would say, well, they weren't in his yard per se. They were more in the pasture, like just beyond the yard. And it's like, it's the yard, it's his property. It's Chad's property. Like, I think it's safe to assume that he buried those children there. Another fact that I learned about John Pryor, and this is thanks to the Seriously podcast, he actually has a criminal record. Yes, I'm going to read this for you. This was in 2012. An attorney accused of assaulting a woman in his Nampa law office is facing trial this week on a charge of battery with intent to commit a felony. Attempt to R-word her. Prosecutors claim John Pryor, 50 of Meridian, tried to have sex with a woman who rebuffed his advances during a May 31st, 2011 incident. During a trial that started Tuesday, Pryor's attorney countered that Pryor and the woman engaged in consensual sexual activity, and the woman's story has changed at times. The trial continued with testimony Wednesday and Thursday. The alleged victim, a 20-year-old woman, told jurors that Pryor offered her money, employment, and assistance in a legal case if she would have intercourse with him. She testified that when she rejected his advances, he attempted to force himself on her. I am shocked. That shocked me when I heard that. And he pled not guilty, but then he changed his plea so that he would get a lesser charge, which typically means that there was so much evidence stacked against him that it was an unwinnable case and he would most likely have to go to jail. So he pled guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor battery and was sentenced to only 120 days in jail, a 100-day suspension, I'm assuming from, practicing as a lawyer, and 30 days discretionary, and fined $137.50. And we just had a video last Friday about the Clayton Eckhart case, and it goes through all of the statistics of women reporting the abuse they've experienced, the trauma they've experienced, and how unsettling it is when these men are allowed to just like walk free. Hey, can you just pay me 137 bucks and say sorry and you're good? And what's frustrating is the fact that this is, I'm pretty sure, a felony misdemeanor. He's still able to practice law. I know young people who want to get involved in the law and they have to go through hoops because of something they did when they were a teenager. It's just so aggravating that someone can literally assault a woman, get convicted of that assault, and then they're able to represent someone in a trial, aka Chad Daybell's trial, and say, he wasn't responsible for burying those children. He was seduced by a beautiful woman. Like, give me a break. That is rich coming from you. And I understand he has to do it. It is his job at this point. I mean, it's always been his job, but his reputation is on the line at this point. So if he doesn't represent Chad to his best ability, it will only reflect poorly on him, because I highly doubt, I'll be very disappointed if Chad does not spend the rest of his life in prison. I'm not going to replay the whole opening statement for you. I'll just give you a brief summary and some talking points that I wanted to share because it's pretty frustrating. I've watched it several times, and that's probably why I am so feisty in this episode, because I am so aggravated at hearing him make this argument. But again, he is doing his job according to professional lawyers. Since I am not one, this is the best defense he has. This is the only option if he wants to have any chance of winning this case. So I understand other people who have been analyzing this opening statement, who have watched far more of these than I, have said he's doing an actual great job. They think that he's really painting a good picture. He's doing what he needs to do to make it look like Lori is the one that is the mastermind behind all this. I personally believe that the evidence will show, and if we go back in history and we recognize that Chad was starting to see himself as a prophet, all of that will and would, if they start using that argument, would show that he was pushing his ideology. Because to me, there's no question these two were in it together. They would have probably become like a couple cult leader, right? Where the two of them were at the helm, and they, like I've said before, they have this like really dangerous, explosive, symbiotic, toxic relationship where they think they're having good ideas, they think they're elevated spiritually, and they just aren't. They're just terrible people. So John Pryor starts off by introducing himself, sharing where he lives. We all need to know he's a local lawyer, I guess. And then he asks the jury to only believe in the facts and the evidence of the case. He asks them to not be distracted by speculation, which is ironic coming from him, because the rest of his opening statement, a majority of it, I'm like, how is this relevant, for one? And secondly, that's not the full truth. You're asking people to believe facts and evidence, but you're very conveniently leaving out certain facts and evidence. He goes on to say that due to his religion, Chad and Tammy actually had a 6-month courtship, which is pretty long and extended for Mormon families, which I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I do know that more fundamental Mormons tend to, if they even have a choice who they get married to, they do get married quickly and pretty young, but 6 months still seems very short to me. He also shares that Chad Daybell is an unremarkable man, which when I first heard that, I was like, wow, I wonder how Chad feels hearing that. He's pretty unremarkable, right? But the intention that John Pryor has with making this statement is to share that he's only had a speeding ticket. He's just a guy that kind of does what he's told. He's just a dude who's a writer and he is really religious and he writes kids books and he talks about his faith and his religion, conveniently leaving out that he's actually has these prophecies in his book, and part of why he and Lori connected was because he had written in his books, and suddenly my prophecies started coming true. So I figured that had to mean that God was speaking to me. And in last week's video about Chad Daybell, we talked about the hindsight bias as it pertains to premonitions. It's basically the idea that someone thinks that they're predicting the future because something happens and they make a connection to a thought they had previously or a fear they had previously or a suspicion they had previously, and they think, oh my gosh, I have a gift. I knew that was going to happen. Whereas it's not necessarily that. It's actually your brain just kind of making connections, almost like that deja vu feeling where you're like, oh, I've been in this situation before, or I've been here before, and it's almost unexplainable. But look, I'm a little woo-woo too. There have been plenty of times in my life where I've been like looking at the radio on my car and I look up at the exact perfect time to slam on my brakes, and you just can't help but wonder, is something watching over me? So I'm not saying that like any spiritual belief is bad or someone's not making a premonition. Who knows? There's so much about the world that we don't understand and we probably will never understand. But when people do try to understand these phenomenons, they discover that, oh, actually, this is a function of the brain. It is a type of bias. So I just want to point that out, that Chad Daybell was starting to tell people that he was a prophet, that he could predict the future. He was a part of a doomsday belief. He was into a vow, which is another voice of reason, which is a doomsday website. He was active on these forums. He was kind of creating a new religion with Lori. So the lawyers established that Chad is an unremarkable man. He's just a guy existing in life, trying to be a writer, maybe doesn't have much direction. He's never gotten in trouble with the law. He's trying to paint Chad as almost like, for lack of a better word for me, like a doofy guy, just like, oh, I don't really know what's going on. My wife was running my publishing company and oh my gosh, I met this beautiful woman and I didn't have any self-control over how I felt about her. I just had to have an affair. She seduced me. It's all her fault. Which maybe there was an element of seduction there. I don't think there was an element of seduction. I think that she wanted to be with someone who was her spiritual equal, and Charles Vallow was not a devout Mormon. We know from evidence that says he converted to Mormonism for her. And she was getting deeper and deeper into her faith. She was always a woman of Mormon faith. So when she started reading more of Chad's books, she connected with him. And when they met, sparks apparently flew. There's no physical evidence to share that she like seduced him. In fact, based off of the evidence I've seen, there could be more that I'm not aware of. He was texting her throughout the rest of the weekend of the conference. I believe they started flirtatiously texting that weekend. I don't think Lori was like seducing him and asking him to do these terrible things to her family members at this preppers convention. So the reason the lawyer is painting Chad in this way is because he's also trying to paint Lori as this, she just loves to get married and get divorced. She's just flighty and she's gotten married several times and has very tumultuous relationships that she's in and out of. And so he's trying to paint her as this like non-committal woman who can kind of get any man that she wants. And I mean, there are elements of that are true, in my opinion. She does seem to be a woman of privilege. It doesn't sound like she's really had a lot of struggle in her life. I think she did tend to get what she wanted. But I also believe that due to Chad's extremely Mormon upbringing, where he basically said that Rexburg, Idaho was going to be the next Jerusalem, I think it's safe to say that, like, when these two people came together, they just collided and it caused catastrophe. John Pryor goes on to talk about Alex, Lori's brother, and imply that Lori and him were always in cahoots. He was a protector of Lori, and Lori got Alex to do her dirty work for her all of the time. There's no real proof, once again, of this. There is an incident that happened where Alex did tase her ex-husband after hearing allegations that this husband had SA'd Tylee. So to me, I don't know if that's, oh, Lori told him to do it. It's her very protective brother trying to act out because he's horrified at what his brother-in-law did. And it's also an interesting argument to make right now in opening statements after just asking the jury to consider all of the facts and the evidence, because now you're not really utilizing the facts and the evidence, because the facts and the evidence show Chad welcoming Alex back into the group like, oh, you've earned your spot here. Thank you for helping us with basically the Charles Vallow situation, allegedly, right? Because he shot Charles Vallow. He was the person doing a lot of the dirty work, yes, but I haven't seen actual proof that Lori asked him to do something to another ex-husband of hers or on her behalf in any other situation besides this one. Furthermore, Chad and Lori started believing that you wouldn't get into heaven unless you were married to someone of your spiritual equality. So if you have to believe in the same thing. And for me, it felt like an arranged marriage. It seemed very strange that the people that were into what Chad and Lori were saying about we have to fight these zombies in order to get to heaven. We have to make sure we're freeing the spirits of people that are negative entities or dark entities. We have to kill all the zombies, right? Because if you killed them on planet Earth, their soul was free to go to heaven. And Chad and Lori started believing that they were not just a part of the, per the Mormon religion, 144,000 people that would get to go to heaven when Jesus returned because they were prepared and they fought for him and they're just the most spiritual of all. Chad and Lori thought they were the leaders of the 144,000. So they bring Alex in, and it seemed very much like they arranged a marriage with someone else who was a prepper. And there was another couple that did this as well. They got married like within days of each other. So if we're going to completely avoid the argument of this is a really intense and scary and deeply integrated religious culty belief that these people are having, we can't use any of that other evidence because that other evidence has occurred because both Chad and Lori believed that they are at a hierarchy. The state's attorney made a really good point that Chad didn't necessarily fall in love with Lori. He fell in love with how Lori saw him as this exalted, incredible prophet because she did. She'd been reading his books. She wanted to meet him at this preppers conference. I would bet money that he's the reason why she went to that preppers conference. So to imply that it was all just Lori is far-fetched to me, and I think it's great that the state's attorney said, yeah, I think he fell in love with the reflection of himself because he thought he was so special and Lori thought he was so special. And in my opinion, because this is what cult leaders and manipulative people tend to do, if they see that you already adore them, if they see that you're already kind of hook, line, and sunk or sank into their ideology or what they believe, or they see a vulnerability within you or a desperation for you to want to get involved in the group that they're creating or what their mission is, they're going to butter you up. They're going to love bomb you. And I believe that's what Chad was doing to Lori. He calls her his exalted goddess, and he's enamored with her, and he texts her that he's never felt this connection with someone ever before. And there's evidence of this. So for John Pryor to ask everyone to focus on the facts and evidence and leave out key parts of the facts and evidence, then what else is there? Speculation, which you've also asked the jury to ignore. And this just goes to show how little people understand cults and cult dynamic. And I don't even think it's fair to say that Lori and Chad were a cult. I think they were trying to like create a cult, create this group. I think they both really, really believed, because of their upbringing in what is considered to be America's largest cult, which Mormonism is considered to be America's largest cult. It might even be considered to be the largest cult in the world. But they'd been conditioned, both Chad and Lori, they'd been conditioned their entire lives to believe in a singular way of thinking. Lori's dad was a prepper. Chad's parents never disciplined him. They thought he could do no wrong. They put him up on a pedestal. They let the boys of the family make fun of their mother. So you have a boy who has never been told no, and you have a woman who has been a prepper her whole life and believes in the second coming and has been a devout Mormon her whole life. These two meet. I think there's no question that disastrous things happen. And furthermore, if we're going to use the argument that, oh, it was all Lori, to me, it doesn't make sense that her children died and his are still alive. And they're actually testifying on his behalf in this trial. So how convenient for him that Lori only wants to kill her own family and then, of course, Chad's wife, Tammy. But all of that's Lori's fault. She somehow had this secret intention to kill her whole family, basically, so that she could be with Chad. And his children? How come they get to live? It seems to me that the person who's identifying who's a dark entity and who's a light entity, and Chad's children are all conveniently light entities, which means they get to survive, but all of Lori's children are somehow dark entities, and that means that they need to be murdered? To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I hope that the jury sees that. And I really hope that the state's attorney presents evidence that leads to a deeper understanding of the years of indoctrination and obsessive prepping that had gone into this. Because, in my opinion, Chad and Lori are equally culpable. John Pryor goes on to talk about the other witnesses that he's going to be bringing to the stand, one of which is someone who is going to support his idea on Tammy's death being really suspicious. And she's a forensic expert and is going to say it's really difficult to identify her cause of death. And I just find that really difficult to believe, because we've seen cases where a body is drowned and has been underwater for days, or at sea for days, and they can still discover the cause of death. Or the body's been badly burned and they can discover, well, this person was actually suffocated before they inhaled the smoke. So they were killed. They didn't die due to smoke inhalation. So I thought that that was a very interesting argument for him to make. I'm very curious to listen to this expert. It's also important to note here that Chad had a premonition that Tammy was going to pass away. And once again, how convenient that that piece of information is just going to be left out. I'm sure the state's attorney is writing notes and is like, oh, I can cross-examine on this point. I can cross-examine on this point. So I'm really anxious to see what happens as we move forward in this trial. All in all, I understand that John Pryor has to do what he has to do. He's had to conjure up some kind of argument and present it to the jury. That's his job. And we all know that a lawyer who is defending someone who's being convicted of murdering somebody obviously has to hope that certain evidence doesn't come to light. I'm not saying that John Pryor is necessarily hiding evidence or doing anything wrong. I just think it's somewhat ironic for the first minute of your opening statement to be, well, let's just stick to the facts and evidence. Don't get distracted while he tries to distract the jury with Chad's just an unremarkable dude. Come on. Like, he just met this hot girl. She was so out of his league. Like, what would you do if you were in his situation? Not murder anybody, that's for sure. And even if he didn't harm those children, who do we all think buried them in the backyard? Who told his wife Tammy to, oh, don't worry about the people that are trying to shoot you outside. It was just probably like a paint gun and they were probably joking around. And then she's passed away weeks later, less than 2 weeks later. This reminds me a lot of the Jane Doe and Clayton Eckhart case. I'm not saying Jane Doe is a murderer or anything like that. It just reminds me of that situation where there's someone making a lot of claims and has shown no proof to back up their claims whatsoever. And in fact, all of the evidence shows so far what we've seen that she is most likely, in my opinion, lying, and she has been lying for a very, very long time, and she continues to make false accusations. The evidence in this case, especially considering how long it's been going on, I think my first video I saw about this was posted 3 years ago. This was a national case when people just wanted to find out where Tylee and JJ were. It was already a media sensation. So if you've been following the case for that long and you see the proof and you do a deep dive into the history of these two people, both separate and as they came together, it's so easy to see how all of this happened and how destructive it's been and terrible it's been. And Lori was found guilty. I feel like it would make, I mean, Chad must still be so delusional that he thinks he can win this because he should just own up to it. Isn't that going to be better? And not be in this delusion of, oh, she made me do it. I was blinded by love. I know it was so bad. I'm so sorry. But dude, we have years of you telling people that you can see the future and you speak for God and you're some kind of spiritual authority. In the opening statement, John Pryor discussed Chad, his books, and the publishing company. Very briefly, he mentioned that Tammy was the one that ran the publishing company because Chad over here, he's just so unremarkable. And then he says that Chad went to this preppers convention because he wanted to sell his books. He wanted to get published. No, sir. He owned a publishing company. He was self-publishing his books. He was publishing other preppers' books. So if we're going to stick to the facts and the evidence, make sure you understand all the facts and the evidence. And again, I'm not a lawyer. There's probably a lot I don't know and a lot I wouldn't understand about this case. I'm not saying I know better than John Pryor, but based off of the misdemeanor we know he had and the statistics that tell us that when someone is finally caught abusing a woman or essaying a woman, it is usually not the first. They've usually had a pattern of doing it many times before. This was just the time that they were caught. So it just feels like John Pryor could potentially, and yes, I'm speculating here, make some really slimy moves throughout the course of this trial. So we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know I was kind of on one today. Some of you guys like it when I'm kind of on one. Some of you like it more when I'm just like, let's just tell a story. I do get heated sometimes, and I'm just very passionate about these children. These children were not dark spirits. They were not dark entities. And to make Chad look like some dopey guy that just got caught up in the lust of being in a new relationship and Lori wanted him to do all of these things to his wife and the kids, and very conveniently his own children weren't an obstacle, it's just frustrating. And I acknowledge that there's a lot I don't understand. I'm not a lawyer. And I'm definitely biased when I talk about this case. I certainly have an opinion. I certainly have my speculations. And I just really appreciate you taking the time on this Monday to listen to me. I'm very grateful for you. I appreciate you. And I would love to hear what you think down in the comments below. Was there anything I got wrong or miscommunicated or misunderstood? Do you agree with where I'm coming from? Do you disagree? I would love to hear your thoughts. This was definitely more of an impassioned rant than an educational video, but I'm really excited to share with you guys. My Teal Swan video will be up on Friday, this Friday. Hold me to it. It's gonna happen. I'm very excited. It will be part 1 of a multi-part series, and I'm very excited about it. And if you wanna click off this video, you can go for it. Totally understand. This is basically the end. But my previous video on Clayton Eckhart from Friday, I uploaded it 3 times because the first 2 times it got flagged and demonetized. So then I re-edited some pieces of it and re-uploaded it, and gratefully it got to stay up. But then yesterday, it got demonetized the same day that I got a notification from YouTube that the other 2 videos that were previously demonetized were fine for YouTube. So I had to ask them to do a review on the same video that they had just told me twice was fine to view and fine to be monetized, was now not monetized. So I have to ask for a review the 3rd time. And the thing is if it's not monetized, YouTube doesn't really have an incentive to push the video out more. You know what I mean? It's not going to share it to people unless they are premium members of the platform, because they're not going to be making money off that ad revenue. So it's a little frustrating, but I've been wanting to start a podcast anyways, and it would be an opportunity for people to listen to the uncensored version of the podcast. I would probably just start putting it up on Spotify right now. The podcast version of my channel does have a Spotify account. It's just Let the Fresh Erin. Pretty easy to find, hopefully. So let me know if you'd be interested in the Spotify version. That way I don't have to edit out any words, and I can not come up with words that just feel really disingenuous and don't speak to the importance of the topic that we're discussing. So let me know if you will listen to a Spotify or if you prefer the YouTube version. I'll probably release the podcast on Thursdays, and then the YouTube version would be here on Fridays, so that anyone who likes the video format can still enjoy the video format. And I've also considered creating a Patreon. So if you don't really listen to podcasts and you still want the video version, just uploading the video version 24 hours prior to releasing it here on YouTube. Let me know if you're interested in any of those things in the comments down below. Thank you again for listening to my rants and my rambles. My next update on this case will be a little more cohesive, a little more put together, but I really appreciate you listening in today, and thank you for your support on all of my other videos supporting these sponsors. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to sit and talk about these things that I'm so passionate about. And I really hope that by talking about these issues, we can create more and more awareness about them. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. Until next time, bye.